So, Nick, Anderson Silva is preparing for his bout against Jake Paul, the boxing match, but he did come out and said he wants to do one more MMA fight, and he wants to finish his MMA career in Japan. Makes sense. Japan loves old school martial artists. They have a ton of respect for fighters like Anderson Silva, so finishing a career out there does seem like a nice storybook ending. Bellator came out and said, we would like to offer you Fedor Emelianenko in Japan to make your wish come true. And listen, I don't care if this is 10 or 15 years past its expiration date. I'm intrigued and I want to see this fight.
Oh, me too. And when Anderson Silva, put the gloves down in the UFC's octagon for the last time, I felt like there was a chapter ending in his life, but not a book. The whole thing wasn't finishing. And I knew that there was probably going to be some professional boxing matches that were going to take place in Anderson's future. But after how good he looked in there with Uriah Hall, right?
Yeah.
I'm right. It was Uriah Hall. I was like, man, there's still something left on the table for Anderson Silva. And I know he's got something else left for us. And it might not be in the UFC, but there's going to be some sort of mega fight, not just in boxing, but likely in MMA. And, for this to come up into the news, I just love it. I think this is a perfect fight. You've got two absolute legends. Of course, the weight classes are a little bit off, and Fedor's a massive guy, and Anderson's fought most of his career at 185, but Anderson can definitely bump up just over that 205, 206 range. And for me, it's a win-win for the MMA community, for both fighters, and likely we'd see Fedor retire off that as well. So I don't know. That's a perfect situation. Bellator knows what they're doing. Scott Coker always sees something crazy that nobody else is really thinking about, and for that, I'm really appreciative.
Me too. I love this notion of this fight. I think it could be one of the biggest fights Bellator has ever put on, probably by a pretty wide margin. And I think it should be the retirement fight for both of them as far as MMA goes. If Anderson wants to keep boxing, he seems to be having some fun and doing well with that, so he can continue. But for him and Fedor, you rarely have a situation where two mega stars, two legends of the sport, can go out together on the same night and sort of round their careers out and call it a day in the same show that would be a mega pay-per-view event likely. And it would be really interesting because Anderson, in my opinion, is quicker and more technical as far as striking goes than Fedor, but Fedor's got that crazy power. He's a very stoic guy. When he comes forward and he hits you, you feel it. He means business. I really don't see much grappling taking place in this fight. I see this being sort of a cat and mouse game. I see Anderson being more active and Fedor looking for the big shots. But yeah, there's not a belt on the line. Yeah, there's no rankings on the line. But you don't necessarily need that to have big fight feel. And there's really only a handful of people where that is the truth. And it's Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal, Conor McGregor, Fedor Anderson, and a handful of others where it doesn't matter what's on the line. Just the simple fact that they're in the cage fighting is what's important, and I think it would be a big, big event.
For sure. And with how respectful Anderson and Fedor have been to the martial arts community, and really they've been pioneers in the sport, I just feel like Japan would be the perfect place. And I guess the size thing would be kind of cool. That's on par with how Japan likes to do it. Sometimes they like to have a really big guy versus a slightly smaller guy, or, styles that make matchups. You get somebody that's a sumo wrestler versus a boxer or something like that. I get these guys are way more similar than that, but I do think this would be a perfect thing. Maybe like a New Year's Eve event that takes place in Japan. They'd sell it out. They could probably put some sort of championship or contenders fights on under it, but these guys, for their last fight, it's got to be 5 rounds. It's got to be a main event. And I think Anderson could walk away from the sport knowing he did absolutely everything, and he can go on and continue his thing with boxing. And I know he's going to be fighting Jake Paul, and if you ask me, I don't think there's anybody in the world that could go from boxing Jake Paul to doing MMA with Fedor Emelianenko other than Anderson Silva. And that's why I find him to be such a special athlete, not only for the sport of MMA, but for all combat sports and all sports in general. And Fedor, I mean, what you see is what you get. He's absolutely legendary status. A lot of people think he's the heavyweight GOAT, and to see him and Anderson in there, who a lot of people think is just the GOAT in general, would be something that the sport really deserves.
For sure. And I don't think the Jake Paul outcome really dictates whether this fight happens or not. If he gets in there and boxes Jake Paul and something weird happens or he loses, I still think there's a huge market for Fedor versus Silva inside of a cage. And I think that fight could still happen regardless of what happens in October in the Paul versus Silva fight.
I totally agree.
Guys, drop us a comment and let us know. Are you interested in seeing Anderson Silva versus Fedor Emelianenko, or is this fight way past its prime? If you're new here, we're your home for all things combat sports. So if you're into that, please subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video. We'll see you next time.
Peace.